Fantasy romance is so hot right now. It's one of the fastest growing genres maybe ever, but certainly of the last several decades. Over the past 5 years or so, fantasy romance has been introducing and reintroducing reading for pleasure to a massive audience of mostly women. In fact, fantasy romance is even partially, if not mostly, responsible for the resurgence of bookstores. The formerly declining Barnes & Noble is set to open 58 new stores in 2025. Fantasy romance, or romantasy, is also responsible for consuming nearly a year of my precious time. You can call me Alice in Wonderland because I have been lost down the rabbit hole. And I don't mean that I've been doing clinical research. I mean that I have been sucked in by this genre, hooked on these books, reading them, loving them, hating them, crying, screaming, giggling, kicking my feet, rolling my eyes, all of it. And I'm ready and eager to talk about it. I want to emphasize that I am making this video because I'm a fan of this genre. I am not trying to make fun of people who read these books. I am people who read these books. That being said, being a fan of fantasy romance often goes hand in hand with being a hater sometimes, because the genre is developing so quickly and it's so profitable. And we're in the age of Kindle Unlimited, where authors get paid per page. There are a lot of soulless cash grabs in this genre. For every gem of a novel, there are 10 duds. And authors are relying on the tropes of fantasy romance to be able to write and put out work at a rate that should be impossible. And I think that they're over-relying on the tropes and that the genre is suffering from a lack of creativity. So today, I'm going to go over 19 fantasy romance tropes. The first trope on our list is a version of the chosen one, which is a popular trope in fantasy in general, and I like to call it the princess that was promised. The basic premise of The Princess That Was Promised is this. Our female main character is the one true heir to the throne. There is a throne, a magical throne, and the only person that has the birthright, the blood right, the bloody birthright to sit on that throne is our female main character. And once she is on that throne, all will be right in the world. And the kingdom will know peace like it's never known before. Sometimes when the female main character enters the picture, the throne is occupado, usually by a man who cheated, lied, stole, and murdered his way onto that throne, which provides further reason for our female main character to take that throne. Because not only is she the best woman for the job, she also needs to save the people from their current ruler, who is objectively evil. But sometimes the throne is not occupado. It has just been sitting open, waiting for the princess that was promised. But that does not mean that the kingdom has been okay without the princess. The kingdom is usually in some type of disarray. Maybe it's been fractioned off and there are all types of different rulers and those rulers are mostly bad. Or maybe there's just general anarchy and chaos. Or maybe there's some vague, dark threat, magical threat that the princess will be able to handle once she takes over the throne. More often than not, the princess had no idea that she was a princess until the beginning of the book. In fact, a lot of the time, she finds out that she's a princess and that she's magic all in one sitting. That's certainly a lot to process. Sometimes she knows she's magic, but she doesn't know that she's a princess. And then, most rarely probably, she knows that she's magic, she knows that she's a princess, but she doesn't really want to deal with being a princess. She's convinced herself that her taking on the throne is not the best thing for herself or not the best thing for the kingdom, and she's waiting for push to really come to shove before she takes up that mantle. When you compare this trope to the fairy tales that a lot of fantasy romance readers were raised on, where the princesses were so demure they were often asleep, it feels kind of progressive, because these fantasy romance princesses are not asleep. They are strong and powerful and opinionated, and they are needed to rule, not just to sit there and look pretty. So it's kind of a reclaiming of the princess stories. On the other hand, monarchy is stupid. The idea that anybody has the right to rule because of who their parents or ancestors are is stupid, and that often goes unaddressed with this trope. It can also get colonial, a little conquery, kind of quickly, because the princess storms into these territories with her armies and just takes over without really consulting with the locals. It can also get a little white saviory, because there's often slavery in these magical worlds, and the only person that can end slavery is this, most of the time, white princess. And when the enslaved people try to fight back for themselves, it's unsuccessful, because it has to be the princess who saves them. They can't save themselves. The second trope on our list is a fantasy classic, and it is Orphans. This trope is pretty self-explanatory. It's when one of the main characters, usually the female main character, does not have parents because her parents are dead. This trope is used most often when the female main character is raised in the mortal realm, whether that be because she is a human at the beginning who wanders into the magical world, or whether she's a changeling, a magic baby that was put in the mortal world for her own protection, but whatever threat her parents were trying to protect her from does get them before she's able to meet them. Sometimes she's a double orphan. Her magic parents are dead, and so are the human parents that were supposed to raise her. So she was raised in an old-timey orphanage or by foster parents. I am not anti-orphan. I support the orphans. My issue with this trope is the reason why I think a lot of these authors are making their female main characters orphans. And that's because parents would make the decision to stay in the magical world indefinitely a lot more complicated. And these authors don't really want to deal with that being a complicated decision. That's not the conflict. That's not supposed to be the conflict of the book. That's just the introduction and exposition of the book. So they want that to be a no-brainer decision for the female main character. They want her to have no connections, no friends, no family, nothing that makes the human world worth anything for her, so that it's so much easier for her to fall in with her found family in the magical world. The third trope on our list is raised by a sociopath. This trope is kind of exactly what it sounds like, and it's when either of the main characters was raised by a cartoonishly villainous sociopath. Sometimes they are also orphans, and this person is their parents' murderer who somehow got custody of them, whether because they're a step-parent or an aunt or uncle, or they kidnapped the main character and then raised them themselves. Maybe they even murdered the parents for the sole purpose of kidnapping our main character. Sometimes only one of the parents is dead, and the sociopath is their biological parent who is raising them. Sometimes both of their parents are alive, but the sociopath has been abusive for so long to the other parent that they are a shell of themselves and can't or won't do anything to protect their child. Sometimes the main character hates that sociopathic caregiver from the beginning of the book. They've always known that this person is bad. They have never wanted to be like that person. They might follow that person's orders to a certain extent, but only out of self-preservation. Sometimes they have no idea how bad it was, and only upon meeting the other main character and experiencing love, real love for the first time, do they begin to reflect and realize how messed up their childhood was. I don't really have a problem with people being raised by sociopaths, but I do think this trope tends to lead towards kind of flat and uninteresting villains, characters who are just bottomless pits of pure evil with no origin story and no reason for the way they act beyond the fact that they want power. And I know that some people are like that, but I think it tends to lead towards these very black and white stories of good versus evil, and I think it's more interesting when there's more gray in there. Our fourth trope is the perfect amount of trauma. In this trope, the female main character has just the right amount of trauma. Enough trauma to where the male main character can support her through it, can hold her during her nightmares, can maybe even beat people up because of it, but not enough trauma that it has a significant impact on her day-to-day, and not enough trauma that it impacts her willingness or ability to be in an intimate relationship. Sometimes I think authors do a pretty effective job of giving their female main characters just the right amount of trauma. Sometimes they do this by making them orphans without a central guardian figure, so their trauma is how they felt abandoned and neglected and didn't get enough love, but there's no abuse per se. Sometimes authors give their female main characters an ex that was vaguely unsupportive or dismissive. Sometimes they make them the victims of bullying for a period of their life. I think both of those are pretty effective at giving just the right amount of trauma. My issue starts to come in when these authors give their female main characters years and years worth of horrific abuse, and the female main character still walks away relatively unscathed, with her mental health intact. You don't have to give all of this trauma to her, but I don't like it when you give her all this trauma and then she barely has to deal with it. I've also noticed that a lot of authors will put the female main character in these situations where logically something would have happened. She would have been touched inappropriately, sexually abused in some way. And it's not that I want these female main characters to be sexually abused. I do not want that. I do not want to read that. But these authors keep writing these abusive predator men and then having the female main character get captured and held captive by these guys. And then for some reason that's never explained, he never touched her, not like that. He might have hit her, but he didn't touch her like that. Again, I do not want these characters to be sexually abused, but these authors keep putting the female main character in these situations where they're with a predator for a prolonged period of time, and the only reason why nothing happened was because the author didn't want to deal with sexual assault. Understandably, this is a fantasy book. We do not need sexual assault, but it makes for inconsistent characterization when this guy is a predator every other time except with the female main character, and it makes it seem like, oh, does he have a silver lining? Is he really not all that bad? When in most of the cases, he is all that bad. We don't get a reason why he wasn't all that bad to the female main character. And sometimes with these situations, it feels like the author is using sexual assault as a cliffhanger of sorts. Will she be assaulted? Buy the next book in the series to find out. And that feels icky. And also, authors who do this tend to downplay the effects of physical and emotional abuse. She's beaten up regularly, but she's not severely traumatized because it didn't veer into sexual abuse. And I don't think that's a great message either. Our fifth trope is never before seen power. The never before seen power trope is when one or both of the main characters have some type of power that's never been seen before, or a level of power that's never been seen before. Even if they don't have a never before seen level of power, it is extremely rare for the main characters to not be some of the most powerful in the realm. Sometimes they aren't the most powerful, but almost always they are relatively powerful compared to other magical people. Now, when we get into the never before seen power, sometimes that is a specific ability that has not been seen in centuries or has never been seen before. If everybody else has elemental powers like water and fire, our main character might have the power of thunder or lightning or shadows. Sometimes it's about quantity. If everybody else has one magical ability, our main characters might have 2 or 3 or even 4. It's often the case that the male main character and the female main character are the 2 most powerful people in the realm, and that when their powers combine, they are virtually unstoppable. One thing that's consistent about this trope is that the characters never had to work for that power. They were born that way, or they were given that power by the gods, and they might train to be able to hone that power more effectively, but they just are that way. I totally get the appeal of this trope. Being exceptional is a fun fantasy. It's a nice little daydream. A lot of us struggle through our day-to-day lives, and the idea that we could go to this other world and already be good at everything is nice. It's a nice little story. The issue I have with this trope is that it gets illogical quickly because you've made your characters so powerful, it doesn't make sense that they keep being defeated. There are all these shoehorned excuses as to why they keep being defeated. Maybe they got cursed, or maybe the person that they're against is using some type of dark magic that gives them an advantage. But it doesn't make sense when, these characters destroyed every other curse that they encountered, defeated every other dark magic threat that they encountered, but they just can't get through this battle, and the plot can never wrap up because we're in this perpetual, endless, when will they win battle. Our sixth trope is magic blocking substance. In this trope, there exists within the magical world some kind of substance that completely cuts off people's ability to access their magical powers. Usually, that substance is iron, but it can be other metals, or plants, or injectables, or pills, or whatever else. My issue with this trope is that it's a little too convenient, and I think authors use it too much to artificially extend the conflict. If they've reached the point with their main characters where they are great at magic, so exceptional at magic that they logically shouldn't be defeated, no problem, just throw some iron in there, drug them, and then you can continue to prolong this conflict with the bad guy. And it's never the good guys that drug other people or give other people the substance to cut them off from their magic, though I don't think there's anything wrong with that if we're talking about dealing with an evil person. It's just always a way for the villain to keep winning. Our seventh trope is standard magic versus dark magic. With this trope, there exists within the magical world at least 2 types of magic. Standard magic, which is what good people use, and dark magic, which is what bad people use. If there is dark magic within the world, you better believe the villain is utilizing that dark magic at every possible opportunity. But using dark magic comes with a price. It affects you. It affects your soul, which is why the villain uses it without a care because he's not concerned about his soul, and which is why it's especially dangerous for our heroes because they have bright, beautiful, perfect souls. It's often the case that the only thing that makes dark magic dark is the way it looks. Visually, it looks like shadows or something similar. But what it does isn't different from other magic. If you kill somebody with your fire or your water power, that's not any different from killing people with your shadows. People are still dead. You still murdered people. That should have an impact on your soul, no matter the method you use to kill them. It just seems a little silly when characters are clutching their pearls over dark magic, even when it's the villain who's using it. Like, oh my God, I knew he was evil, but I never thought he'd stoop so low as to use dark magic. Meanwhile, people get murdered all the time. That's the norm for this magic society, is that weak people are killed off by their peers because the weak people will drag them down. And those people are taken aback and shocked and disgusted by the use of shadows. Our 8th trope is fated mates. With this trope, there exists within the magical world fated mates. And fated mates are two people that the stars or the gods or fate herself have decided belong together. They might be the most compatible people for each other. They might not be all that compatible, but they are just destined to love each other. And there is no love greater than the love between two fated mates. Sometimes all you have to do is look at your fated mate to know that that person is destined for you. Sometimes it's a gut feeling that you can ignore for a time, but will eventually become impossible to ignore. Sometimes it's a smell thing. You smell them and wow, they smell perfect. That's more for the shifter fantasy romance, where people turn into wolves most of the time, but other things too. Sometimes you have a limited amount of time to get to know that person and commit to them forever, or you'll never see them again. Sometimes fated mate bonds are sealed through lovemaking. And sometimes you have to find your fated mate and bond with them in order to have access to the full depths of your power. I think the fated mates trope is pretty fun a lot of the time. There's obviously nothing like that in the real world. It's pure fantasy. So I definitely think it has its place in fantasy romance, and I'm glad that it's a trope. However, I do think that authors rely on it a bit too much to tell us that the couple is compatible without having to show us that the couple is compatible. Especially in bullies to lovers or enemies to lovers, authors rely on that fated mates trope to justify why these two ended up together, why they belong together. They've been fighting viciously for the majority of the book or series, and then we kind of jump to happily ever after relatively quickly. So something like the fated mates trope is really convenient for explaining why these two ultimately are good together when we've not seen or read the evidence of that. Another potential pitfall is that fated mates are supposed to be super rare, but a lot of the time authors can't help themselves, and they just make everybody, all the side characters, fated mates. Everybody has a fated mate. You get a fated mate. You get a fated mate. You get a fated mate. And then sometimes there are couples that are so compatible on the page, and yet those two aren't fated mates. And that kind of weakens the idea of fated mates, because if the best couple in the series aren't fated mates? Are fated mates really the best couples? Our 9th trope is female main characters that are not like the other girls. The not like the other girls trope is when the female main character is defined in opposition to other women, and that can manifest in a variety of ways. One version of this is, you don't know you beautiful, that's what makes you beautiful. You don't know you beautiful, that's what makes you beautiful. One Direction. It's gross to be attracted to somebody because of their low self-confidence, but obviously you don't need anybody else to have low self-confidence. The reason this is in the not like the other girls category for me is that the men are attracted to the female main character because she's shy and demure and doesn't like her body, and that's different from all the other girls they encounter. The other girls are cocky and brazen and always strutting their stuff, and that's a turnoff for the men. They like the fact that the female main character has body image issues, unlike her peers. Sometimes the other girls treat the male main character like he's a piece of meat. They don't really see him, but the female main character sees him for all of his complexities. And this one's so silly because the female main character always ends up treating the male main character like he's a piece of meat, at least to an extent. Not that he's not treating her in an objectified way too, but please, woman, you've just described his 8-pack abs in vivid detail and his thing that's the size of a Subway footlong, and you're telling me you're not shallow like the other girls? You want him for his personality and his personality alone? Okay. Sometimes it's the classic not like the other girls mentality where the female main character rejects traditionally girly things. And I think it's lame to define yourself by the things that you don't like, no matter what those things are. And that's what this is. The female main character thinks she's better than other people because she doesn't like pink or doesn't like wearing dresses. Sometimes the female main character talks about how she's never had female friends and she finds women confusing and she doesn't know why they don't like her. But then, of course, the men know it's because they're intimidated by her beauty. And yeah, there are mean girls that exist in the world, and they can certainly exist within fiction. But if the only good woman, TM, is your female main character, that's misogynistic. That's a misogynistic book. The female main character is also often bullied by the popular girls. Even though our female main character is stunningly beautiful and super talented, she is relentlessly bullied by these popular girls. Even though these popular girls are often explicitly ugly. They're trolls, hideous women. And they have obsessive crushes on the male main character. But it is not the ugly weirdo who is the victim of bullying, no. It is the prettiest, sweetest girl that ever lived. Finally, in a lot of enemies to lovers, the reason why the male main character does not like the female main character at first is because of sexism. Because some woman at some point in his life mistreated him, and he assumed that the female main character would be the same, because that experience with that one woman has made him distrustful of all women. And then once he realizes that she's different, he doesn't think, oh, maybe I've been wrong about women in general. He thinks, wow, you're not like the other girls. And that's gross. Our 11th trope is bad guys using mind control. In this trope, our main villain has mind control magic, and we usually don't learn that until later in the book or series. And when we learn that, we realize there are people that we thought were villains that were really under the main villain's control this whole time, and they are not to blame. Sometimes the villain was born with mind control magic, and it's a relatively unique ability that's pretty easy to hide because people just don't know about it. Sometimes they acquire the ability to control people's minds through the use of dark magic, and sometimes they have to have physical objects on that person to be able to control their mind, like a ring or a necklace or something like that. One issue I have with this trope is that authors tend to use it to be able to preserve their perfect black and white, good versus evil dichotomy. They can turn somebody that we had previously thought of as bad into good with the flip of a switch. But just because somebody was following this bad person doesn't mean that they are all bad. People make mistakes. People put their loyalty in the wrong people. People can assume that they're doing the right thing when they are very much doing the wrong thing. And I think that's all more interesting than this, oh, they didn't do any of it type of cop-out. My second issue with this trope is that it's often unbelievable that nobody noticed that these people were being mind controlled. They underwent extreme personality changes overnight, and nobody questioned that. Even worse is when they wear the same dark ring or dark piece of jewelry every day that they never wore before, and nobody questions that either. Also, they've got this dead-eyed look and soulless way of talking, and everyone's like, yeah, that's just how he is, I guess. He was a really great dad, and then all of a sudden, he was this. Our 11th trope is impulsive, headstrong, female main characters. Another less favorable way of describing this trope is female main characters who are too stupid to live. These characters are constantly barreling headfirst into incredibly dangerous situations without having all of the information about the situation and without asking for anybody else's input. Not only do they put themselves in danger with their half-baked plans, but they also put everybody that has to go on a rescue mission to go save them from their stupidity in danger too. These characters are often the youngest and least experienced in multiple ways in their group. Sometimes they are the youngest by centuries. And the reason they don't consult with anyone else is because they don't want anybody to try to stop them from their mission. These characters are also far too willing and eager to sacrifice themselves when that is not necessary in the vast majority of these situations. If they just consulted with others, they would realize that there are 18 other ways of tricking the bad guy than throwing yourself at his feet and saying, "Go ahead and torture me, Daddy." They're also far too willing to negotiate with criminals, with the bad guy, especially if they think that their male main character is at risk. The bad guy says, do this or else. They say, okay, I better do that because he said, or else. There's no time to think of another plan. He said, or else. I'm gonna run to the bad guy's lair and throw myself at his feet. I guess I don't like this trope because it's a bit too chosen one. This female main character is so confident in her own reasoning, and she's so confident that she's the only one that can handle this great magical threat. Meanwhile, that magical threat has existed for centuries and centuries before she came into the picture. But also, I just find it insufferable. People are worried about you, babe. When you run away like this, people are worried. Just talk to people, please. You've got us worried sick. Our 12th trope is treasure hunting. Treasure hunting is what I'm calling the trope where characters have to find some long-lost magical artifact or book or special magical ingredient in order to advance the plot. But first, we need to find X. Books and series that use the treasure hunting trope usually don't use it just once. It is a pattern of needing this long-lost artifact or the other before they can keep going. I think authors use treasure hunting to artificially extend the plot, extend the series, and make it so that it kind of feels like we've accomplished something, but really, how much has the plot advanced? We knew that we needed to find this object, and then we spend a huge chunk of the book looking for the object, and then when we find the object, okay, now we've found the object, and the real work can begin. Some authors also seem to lose track of all the treasure hunts that they've sent us on, the long list of necessary magical objects, ingredients, and books that we need to find before we can actually go into battle. And so when the big battle happens, those objects are a footnote. Oh yeah, and this thing helped in this way a little bit. It just doesn't feel worth it for the amount of the book that we're searching around for it. And also when we're on these side quests to find something, there's no real suspense because we know they're gonna find it. Our 13th trope is fake deaths. I'm dead. I'm alive again. Just kidding. This trope is when authors kill a character, allegedly, but that death doesn't stick, and they come back to life. The main reason why the dead don't stay dead in this trope is the power of love. They were gonna die, but then their heart said, wait, you're in love. Don't you want to stay for your love? And the character's like, oh, I do want to stay. And through willpower alone, I have told death, no, I've got to get back to my lover. This trope is stupid, particularly when it comes to the main characters, because we know they're not really dead. We know that you're not going to keep them dead, because this is fantasy romance, and romance requires a happily ever after. So you can toy with my emotions all you want, but I don't believe you. I never believed you, not for 1 second. It gets even more ridiculous when the same logic is applied to more tertiary characters, side characters. They're still prominent in the book, but they're not the main characters, and still, death will not stick to them because the author doesn't have the guts. The only time death sticks is when it's villains or the most side of side characters that nobody cares about. I think mortal peril is plenty effective, and we don't need these fake deaths because the fake deaths lower the stakes irreversibly. Once I know that you will bring someone back from the dead, I don't believe you for 1 second for the entire rest of the book when you say that we're in danger. No, we're not, because we'll just snap back. We're resilient that way. Our 14th trope is aggressively possessive male main characters. This trope is when the male main character is obsessed with the female main character and fiercely protective of her, to the point where if you look at the female main character, he might beat you up. There's nothing wrong with being protective of your significant other, but beating people up for looking in your significant other's direction is not being protective of them. It is abusive. In the real world, if somebody acted like that, where they isolated you so much because they didn't like the idea of anyone knowing how hot you were, that would be abusive. And I get that there's dark romance. Dark romance is its own kind of subgenre across romance as a whole, where things that are not okay, toxic things happen. But the thing is, with dark romance, everybody agrees. The author and the audience all agree that this is toxic and that nobody would want it in real life. But I'm not talking about these aggro guys appearing in dark romance. I don't really read dark romance. These guys are presented in standard fantasy romance as if this type of behavior is romantic. These characters also do everything in their power to prevent the female main character from contributing in any meaningful way, even though she's usually one of, if not the, most powerful of them all, and her contribution to the mission would be invaluable, could save hundreds, if not thousands, of fairy lives. The male main character does not want to entertain the idea of her helping. And then she'll ask him to teach her how to fight because she's tired of feeling helpless. And he will be super resistant to that because he doesn't like the idea that she might ever need to know how to fight. He wishes he lived in a world where he was omnipresent and could stand in between her and any threat that might come her way. Maybe he really does just hate the idea of her fighting because that's not who she is. Maybe he intentionally wants to keep her weak because he enjoys how she relies on him. Regardless, actively preventing your significant other from being able to defend themselves is wrong. And God forbid somebody actually harms the female main character, actually wrongs her in some way. Murder is always the answer in that case. There's no ethical dilemma there for the male main character. This guy was mean to my lady, so I'm gonna kill him. I'm gonna kill him dead. I don't find this all that romantic, and I understand that this is fantasy, but I don't like that these guys are held up as being good guys. These guys aren't good guys, TM. They have issues. They have a lot of issues. Our 15th trope is, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in this big cozy bed. In this trope, the female main character is in some type of mortal peril and she blacks out. And when she wakes up, she is in the male main character's big cozy bed. This trope just is the male main character saving the female main character, the damsel in distress, without having to tell or show us how that rescue mission happened. We are often in these situations where there seems to be no way out, nothing we could do to save ourselves, and then we just wake up in the big cozy bed, and we never get the details of what happened while we were passed out. I certainly understand the appeal of this trope. Sometimes you want to be able to get from point A to point B without explaining all the middle stuff in between. But I think authors rely on it way too much. Constantly, these women are fainting and then waking up in safety. And you don't have to describe every footstep from the dire situation to the bed. You can still skip over that without having her faint. I guess my main thing is that the men are not passing out. They're never passing out. They are undergoing similar levels of torture and torment, but it doesn't affect them to the point where they're blacking out all the time and being carried to a new destination. It's only the women that are fainting. And that's why I don't like it. Because these are supposed to be the most powerful women in the world. And you're telling me they faint 8 times a book? Our 16th trope is the conflict is low self-confidence. In this trope, one of the main obstacles preventing the female main character from reaching her goal is her own lack of confidence. Sometimes she has low self-confidence about her ability to be the princess that was promised. She doesn't believe that she's the best person to rule the kingdom. Sometimes she just has low self-confidence about herself as a magical being in general. And she's always thought of herself as a mousy little something, and even though she keeps finding out that she's super powerful, she can't wrap her head around it. She just doesn't see herself that way. And doubts are understandable, certainly, but I'm not just talking about doubts. This is the main conflict in the book. Usually this happens within a series, so it's not that the entire series is about her low self-confidence, but the first main obstacle she has to overcome is her own inner saboteur. Sometimes, and this is far more ridiculous in my opinion, the big conflict is that she doesn't believe she's good enough for the male main character. She doesn't believe that the male main character wants her or could possibly want her because she don't know she beautiful. That's what makes her beautiful. This is particularly ridiculous when the male main character explicitly tells her tons of times that he wants her bad. He can't stop thinking about her. But she just keeps coming back to the idea that she's not hot enough. I know that low self-confidence is real. I know that it makes sense, that it's a perfectly logical thing to go through for real and fictional characters. I just hate this trope because I hate internal monologue, and this trope gives authors an excuse to give us pages and pages and chapters and books worth of internal monologue, saying, I don't know, should I? Because on the one hand, but on the other hand, I'll just have to keep thinking it over. Our 17th trope is ancient old man with 19 to 23-year-old young woman. This trope is actually a lot less common than you might assume if you have only read some of the most popular books in the genre. But what it is that a super old man is with a 19 to 23-year-old woman. And the only thing that really makes this not creepy is that he doesn't look like an old man because he is immortal. Sometimes she starts the series as a human being and he comes across her when her life is in mortal danger and he saves her by turning her into magic. And then, of course, it naturally follows that they become lovers. Another reason that's given is their fated mates. That fated mate trope is really convenient for justifying weird or irrational pairings. And if they're fated mates, he's just been waiting around for her to be born so that his life can truly begin. And isn't that romantic? Sometimes their magic is super compatible. Usually they're fated mates too, but sometimes they also have the most powerful magic, and when it's combined, it's just gorgeous. It's beautiful, the way that their magic melds together. So that's why it's okay for him to be 500 and her to be 19. And sometimes she's the only one that really sees him. Everybody else is afraid of him because he's a creepy old man who's super aggressive towards anybody that tries to get close to him, except for her. Because she sees him. And God, does it feel good to be seen. I get that we're reading fantasy, And it is not supposed to be realistic. And an author writing a relationship between an ancient man and a young woman is not an endorsement of 500-year-olds getting together with 19 to 23-year-olds. My main issue with this trope is that authors don't know how to write ancient people. These ancient old men often are incredibly immature and petty and violent and act out in similar ways to their teenage lover. It's also never slowed a single female main character down when she realizes that this guy is ancient. That should give her some pause. Even if she is going to end up with this guy, the fact that he is hundreds of years older than her should give her at least the slightest of pause. I just think we are so rarely provided adequate explanation for why these two belong together, besides that they're fated mates or that their powers match up. What about their personalities? What about their personalities? Our 18th trope is female main character and her exceptional artistic talent. This trope is all over fantasy romance, and it's simple enough. Female main character has exceptional artistic talent. Things like dancing, painting, playing piano, singing. And she's had that talent before she met the male main character, before she learned she was magic, if she learned that she was magic within the book. It's not a talent that is enhanced by her magic. It's just a talent that exists apart from her magic. I don't have a problem with female main characters having artistic talent. I just think that sometimes in practice this trope comes across a little silly, because there's always this scene where the male main character sees the talent for the first time and he's taken aback. He can't believe it. She's just so special and exceptional. And sometimes, like with dancing, when that's the talent, and they're basically at the club, and then the way she starts moving to the music is so fluid and beautiful and gorgeous and special, and jaws are dropped and people are crying, and it's a religious experience for some. I don't know what it is exactly. Maybe it's mainly a me problem, but artistic talent described via text just doesn't hit. I can't see the painting, and I can't help but picture finger painting. I can't see the dance, and I can't help but imagine the Macarena. I can't hear the pianoforte, and I can't help but imagine that rodeo clown type music. I don't know why. Though I do know that a lot of people who read A Court of Thorns and Roses, where Feyre is a painter, also pictured her paintings as being comically bad. Our 19th and final trope is, the world may be burning, but you have to go to this mandatory fancy party. With this trope, we're in the thick of it. We are in the heart of the conflict, and that is the moment where our female main character has a mandatory fancy party that she can't get out of attending. Oftentimes the host of the fancy party is the main villain of the series. We have to go to the party that the guy who wants to kill us is hosting, because if we don't go, he might not like us. The purpose of this trope is having a moment where the female main character descends a staircase, perhaps, or exits a room in an exceptionally fancy dress, and the male main character is standing there, awestruck, blown away by her beauty. That's what this trope is for that moment. I do understand the appeal of this trope. Everybody loves the moment where the male main character realizes just how stunning the female main character is. And sometimes you do want a little bit of a pause in the main conflict when you're really in the thick of it. However, I do think that it comes across as a little ridiculous a lot of the time. What do you mean you're going to a party at the guy's house who's actively trying to kill you? I don't care if he invited you. Of course he invited you. He's trying to kill you. And it's not like they usually go to these parties and everything's chill and cool there. They go to these parties that they know it's kind of stupid to attend, but they convince themselves, I have to. And then some big bad thing happens there. Don't worry, we have some dancing and eating and the type of connection we're looking for first, but eventually a big bad thing happens at the party. 'Cause of course it does. It's happening at the villain's house. Okay, that was 19 fantasy romance tropes. I had fun. I hope you had fun too. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm going to put out another video next week, so it wouldn't be a bad idea to subscribe if, that's something you feel like doing. I hope you have a good week, and if you can't have a good week, I hope at least one good thing happens to you. All right. Good night. You've got this.